And you've all just heard from our opening keynote speakers. We're right on time with our panel one for the day. It's the state of student debt in America. And I will be passing off the mic to Alex. Alex, do we have you on the line? All right, and I see Alex. Awesome. Take it away for our first panel of the day.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. We want to start by thanking our panelists for participating. Just go over some housekeeping really quick as well. We really do encourage the audience to share questions. We're going to ask, we'll go through those at the end of the session here today. And we'll try to get through as many as we can as possible during the Q&A section. But please just go ahead and share your questions in the chat. And we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can once we enter our Q&A session. So I'm really excited to introduce our panelists today. We have a great discussion for you all. First, we have Abby Shafroth, who is the co-director of advocacy at the National Consumer Law Center. She's also the director of the National Consumer Law Center's Student Loan Borrower Assistance Program, and she's an expert on the Federal Student Loan Program, as well as on the intersection of criminal and consumer law. Next, I'd love to introduce Persis. She is the Student Borrower Protection Center's Deputy Executive Director and Managing Counsel. She's also a nationally recognized expert on student loan law and has decades of hands-on experience representing student loan borrowers. And lastly, I'd love to introduce Sabrina Calazan. She currently serves as the Managing Director at the Student Debt Crisis Center, where she advocates for student debt cancellation by putting borrowers and their stories front and center. And as a student loan borrower herself and first-generation American, she is passionate about bringing awareness to the disproportionate impact of student loan debt on communities of color, low-income communities, and women. So those are our panelists. We're super excited for our discussion today. I think to kind of kick off the discussion, we're really going to focus on talking about taking note of the wins we had through this endeavor these past couple of years, and then also talk about areas we still need to make some progress. So like I was talking about, starting off our first question, there's no doubt that borrowers are experiencing unprecedented level of confusion and uncertainty. Legal challenges have forced millions into economic limbo, pushed broad-based debt relief out of reach for millions. And before we get to that, I do want to start off on a positive note because we did have some wins these past couple of years, and take stock of where borrowers at currently and talk about some of the meaningful progress we've made and some of the wins we've had over the past 4 years. Each of your respective organizations have been working for more than a decade now to push a lot of these systematic reforms. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your feedback when it comes to the progress we've made. And then, so we'll start right there. In all of your opinion, what is one area of work or policy solution that you've seen the Biden-Harris administration really make progress when it comes to this issue of student debt that you and your organizations are most proud of? And whoever wants to jump in first, please, if somebody's itching to really jump in with this question right away.
I can start. Again, I'm Abby Shafroth from NCLC. There are a number of things that we're really proud of, but one of them that I think has really delivered already for a number of borrowers and holds the potential to help millions more borrowers in the coming years is something that sounds a little overly technical, but it's the IDR account adjustment. So what does that mean? So income-driven repayment is the type of repayment plan that offers a really important promise to borrowers. That promise is, if you pay what you can based on your income for 20 or so years, then we'll consider you to have met your payment obligation. You will have kept your promise, and the government will keep its promise to you by canceling any remaining balance on your loan, meaning you do your part for 20 years and you're done. You get to walk away, you're debt free. However, the program wasn't working. We know that because NCLC and our partner SBPC, Happy Persis is here today, we got the data, we got the numbers. We saw that 25 years into the program's operation, there were millions of people who had already spent 20 plus years in repayment, and there were only a few dozen who'd ever actually gotten their loans canceled. so clearly something was not connecting. There was a problem between what the program offered and what it was actually delivering. We put out that information, and then we worked with others, and so a number of investigations followed that showed that the servicers who were supposed to be helping people get into these payment plans and tracking the payments they made and ultimately canceling loans had fallen asleep on the job. They weren't doing it, and the records were a mess. So borrowers and borrower advocates banded together, and we called on the Biden administration to make it right. And to its credit, the Biden administration really listened. They listened, they worked with us, and they agreed that there had been a failure and that they owed it to borrowers to fix it. So they've been doing that for the past couple of years. They've been basically auditing the records, recounting all borrowers' payments to make sure that people get the credit that they've earned and that they deserve. And as a result, over 1 million people have had their loans canceled through this program, a big increase from like the 32 that had previously gotten their loans canceled. And we know that they're working right now, sort of even as we speak, at trying to apply this recount to millions more, to everyone's accounts. Which should mean that millions more people are going to be years closer to having their loans canceled and to being debt free. So everything, the system is still very much broken, but that is a real bright spot, and I think shows what advocacy can accomplish.
Amazing. Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to chime in, add anything else to the conversation? I'm sure there's so many more wins we could talk about.
Yes, I definitely agree. The IDR adjustment is a really big key piece that we're really proud of. Something else that we're really proud of is the PSLF waiver. So the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Waiver is a program where if you're in public service, you work full time and make 10 years worth of payments, you're then eligible to have your loans forgiven. And so a lot of folks during the previous administration had applied to PSLF only to realize that they were in the wrong repayment plan, or they didn't have a qualifying, employment for something happened along those lines, that they were just shut out of the program. And so this waiver really allowed folks to go back, reapply, and get their loans forgiven. And so at SDCC, we work, every day with borrowers. And so helping people to be able to take advantage of that, to get their debt canceled, to say this is life-changing relief, was huge for us. And I know that we're really proud of that work. But of course, we worked very closely with Persis, with Abby, with so many other folks to make sure that as many people as possible got this debt canceled. And under the Biden administration, we've seen more than $170 billion of debt canceled. And so that is a lot of debt canceled. There's still a lot of debt remaining. So there's a long way to go, but we have to really stop and take the wins as we have them.
And I'm happy to jump in there. Thank you, Alex and Abby and Sabrina. I think one of the things, and just to kind of like reiterate what Sabrina just said, right? Like nearly 5 million people are now debt free because of things like the income for repayment account adjustment, like the PSLF waiver, and because of changes to very technical regulations on the way we do disability discharges and closed school discharges, and like massive amounts of group discharge borrowers getting discharges through because of recognition of like widespread fraud. And so I really do think we should celebrate every single borrower, right? That is 5 million people whose lives have been changed. And yes, we have so much further to go, but we have to celebrate every single win and every single borrower. I think the thing that I want to really highlight in kind of like encapsulating the various different changes that led to those 5 million people, like in both the IDR account adjustment and the PSLF waiver and these borrower defense discharges, is that we talk about student debt differently. And I think that is the piece that will let us fight for the remaining 40 million people. That when I started doing this work a couple decades ago, we talked about student debt as good debt. And one of the things which you heard Abby say, and which we have heard the president and the secretary of education say, is that the system is broken. We know that the programs that we have are not working. Income for repayment was supposed to provide this benefit that Abby talked about, but it didn't deliver. That servicers have not been delivering. When Biden took office, we saw the exit of Navient, we saw the exit of Fed loan servicing, and now we see a lot of attention on Mohila and the harms that it is causing to borrowers. And so I think one of the most enduring things that we should take from this administration is how we now talk about this problem and how we can use how we've been talking about it, and the recognition that this is not good debt, that this is a system that is fundamentally flawed and not working, in order to move us towards a place where we can eventually get back to fighting and finishing the job for the other 40 million student loan borrowers.
Thank you all so much. I want to touch on, we talked a lot about like how this moment is, there really is some framing contextualized around student debt. And, it has been a conversation that has been happening for decades. But I also think I want to shift a little bit and maybe focus a question with Persis and Abby, talking about maybe a lot of the protections that were established during the pandemic that are no longer available, where we saw the pandemic really be a focusing point, right? Where we really saw a lot of additional protections, or legislators really come to the table and start talking about this issue with, the student loan payment pauses, and the pandemic really kind of being a focus point for the student debt conversation. The Biden administration established a 1-year on-ramp period that protected borrowers from economic consequences of falling behind. And, I want to talk about some of these, what are some of these, Persis specifically with you, what are some of these immediate consequences now for borrowers should they fall behind? And then secondly, Abby, if you could follow up later and maybe talk a little bit about how borrowers that were in default before the pandemic, what that kind of looks like for them now. Like what are we looking at now that these pandemic era protections are expiring? But I'd love to kick it off with you, Persis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that is so important for folks to understand is how federal student loans just fundamentally operate different than other types of financial products. And it is a truly remarkable thing, because we had the payment pause for so long and then the on-ramp, that so many people have entered the student loan system not experiencing some of the worst of what our student loan system can do, which is both great, and we should celebrate those 4 years, but also means that a lot of people just don't understand how bad this system can work. And so I know Abby will talk about some of the consequences of actual default, but thinking about that period leading up to it, I think that's one of the first differences, is that there is a distinction in the federal student loan system between delinquency and default. So you can be behind on your payments, but not yet in default. And actually there you have 270 days, plus a little bit more for, processing and servicers to take their time, but roughly 270 days to be behind on your loans before you fall into default, which has really terrible consequences like wage garnishment and seizure of Social Security and tax refunds. But within those, 270 days, there are still consequences, right? And so this is, in general, it's the opportunity for borrowers to enter into repayment and kind of get back on track. But we do see some of the consequences, like credit reporting, starting at 90 days behind. And that's when you're going to see people seriously experiencing the difficulties of if they're trying to get housing, if they're trying to, get a car, do things that they need to do to participate in the economy, those consequences are going to start up much sooner than the other consequences of default. And so folks should be aware of that. And of course, it is, the Biden administration has done some things that are going to eventually help streamline getting people out of delinquency into income driven payment plans, but those aren't necessarily in place yet. So programs that will enroll people who are 75 days delinquent into income driven payment plans, that requires consent. And a lot of people haven't provided that consent. And so, people need to take proactive steps in order to avoid default. And we don't have all of the safety nets in place yet. And of course, as we'll talk about later, we don't have the benefit of the SAVE plan. And so people need to be aware of the consequences that will start to flow immediately, especially with their credit reporting.
Amazing. Abby, do you want to touch on about how borrowers that were in default before the pandemic, how, what the impact might be for them now?
Yeah, so sort of similar to the payment pause, for borrowers who were in default before the payment pause began, so people who defaulted before March 2020, they weren't required to make payments, and collection actions that would have impacted them were all paused as a result of the pandemic. And that pause actually lasted longer. So the pause for borrowers in default, it went the full time that the payment pause went, but then it also went for basically the duration of the on-ramp. They called it this Fresh Start program, which was a program to make it easier for borrowers to get out of default, get back on track in repayment by calling their servicer or filling out an online form and requesting to be removed from default. They left that program open through this fall, but that program has now ended. The Fresh Start program is over. That means that borrowers who were in default before the pandemic and who haven't gotten out of default through this Fresh Start program are considered in default again. And as Persis flagged, though we expect negative credit reporting of those defaults to occur sooner, most of the sort of normal consequences of default, the really like harsh and financially destabilizing collections, that collection activities that can happen, aren't expected to resume until 2025. The Department of Education has said that it won't begin until 2025, and there's a question, I think still an open question about exactly when in 2025 that will happen. But those things are quite serious and cause the borrowers that we've worked with a lot of financial pain. So it's things like having your tax refund seized, can be, your whole tax refund if you owe more than your tax refund is. Seizure of money from Social Security benefits, so both Social Security disability benefits and Social Security retirement benefits. Only the first $750 a month is really protected. That's not enough to live on. And wage garnishment. So they can have money, work with your employer to have money taken directly out of your paycheck before it arrives in your bank account. So those are all like pretty serious and harsh things that a lot of people might not be thinking about or aware of or have any idea is around the corner, because those collections have been turned off for a long time, because there's been a lot of talk, for good reason, about changing and reforming some of those programs. But unfortunately, we haven't yet seen announcements of real reform there. So that's, I think what people should expect going forward. I do want to flag and make sure people know that there are still options to get out of default, even though the Fresh Start period is over. Borrowers can often still consolidate their loans or rehabilitate their loans to get them out of default. And if you're not able to do either of those paths, you can try to demonstrate that that having money taken from your Social Security or tax refund would cause real financial hardship for you, and you wouldn't be able to meet your expenses, to get some protection there. And so I would encourage anyone who is or works with people or knows people in default to look into their options before those collections resume.
Thank you all for guiding this conversation in such an informative and an effective manner in terms of helping us all navigate this crazy system. Considering that, a lot of things we heard about as, borrowers and consumers, was that the broad-based student debt relief we were really looking to in the 2020 election. It was among many presidential campaign platforms. And thinking about that, and then thinking about also the ongoing legal challenges and impacts that have encountered a lot of these vital debt forgiveness programs, whether it is the broad-based approach, whether it is the SAVE plan. And I would love to pivot to you, Persis, to talk specifically kind of about some of the questions, regarding these legal challenges. As the Biden administration has continued its efforts to provide, broad-based student debt cancellation, and that was blocked by partisan legal challenges. And then since then, there have been a flurry of legal challenges. It gets hard to keep track of all of them and keep up with everything that's happening. Can you give us just a brief overview of kind of where we stand on these various challenges that are facing President Biden's efforts to enact this life-changing debt relief?
Yeah, so it has been, there has been a lot. And it feels like a lot for borrowers, and it is a lot. So just to kind of like step back and like kind of remind us how we got here. So in August of 2022, President Biden did announce, as you mentioned, broad debt relief for tens of millions of student loan borrowers, up to $20,000 of cancellation for folks who received a Pell Grant, $10,000 for folks who hadn't. And it would have provided life-changing relief to millions. Nearly half of the student loan portfolio would have been debt-free as a result. And unfortunately, we saw right-wing groups come out of the woodwork to try to challenge this relief. And I think one of the things that's important to mention is that we saw like roughly a dozen lawsuits, and they were largely believed to be baseless, and most of them were dismissed. And in fact, one of the ones that ultimately was the one that was the first one to kind of shut down the program was again dismissed by the Supreme Court. But of course, the right-wing leaning Supreme Court then, ultimately did invalidate the program. The $10,000 and $20,000 cancellation was based upon, COVID disaster relief. And the court said that that was not a valid use of that authority. So kind of what the administration did is it went back and said, okay, well, we're going to do what we've all colloquially called Plan B, right? We're going to do a Plan B. We're going to use different authority. We're going to use the Higher Education Act. And we're going to do a rulemaking, a very technical, slogging process, regulatory process to come up with these rules. It had committees. There was public comment. There was then publication of drafts and notice and comment. And where we are now with the rule is that the rule has never been finalized, has never been implemented, yet the Missouri Attorney General and a number of other Republican Attorney Generals have joined in a lawsuit to block the administration from implementing Plan B, this process that was meticulously developed with notice and comment, with servicers at the table, with schools at the table. They've filed a lawsuit to block it. It's a really extraordinary suit that they've brought, because as lawyers, we tend to understand regulatory law to say that you have to finalize a rule in order to sue about it. There has to be a thing to be challenged in order to bring a lawsuit. Nonetheless, this is the court system that we're in. And so the court in the Eastern District of Missouri has blocked part of the rule that has that the administration was working towards finalizing, and that's the rule that would have provided relief to folks who had loans that were older than 20 or 25 years, for folks who had, runaway interest, where we know that this was a huge problem of folks like where their interest had just ballooned and they owe so much more than they took out, folks who went to schools that didn't provide them with value, and folks who would have qualified for cancellation but just never filled out the paperwork because they didn't know about it, because as we've talked about, the programs don't work. And so those programs, the court has enjoined those programs, and that is still pending, and probably at this point unlikely to happen. But there was another piece of the rulemaking of this Plan B, which was on hardship. And so there is an outstanding notice and comment period out right now where people can still comment about the hardship that student debt is causing them and the need for relief based upon hardship. So it is definitely in flux, and there is, nothing solid in place right now with those plans, but there is still this one last opportunity for folks to make their voice heard about why relief is so necessary.
And I mean, it's so interesting that it just seems like these right-leaning organizations or right-leaning groups are just throwing roadblocks at every instance. We even saw more legal challenges come up with when the Biden administration, introduced like the SAVE plans to help borrowers simply have more affordable options to pay down their debt. Abby, I'd love for you to give us a little rundown of those challenges we are currently seeing regarding Biden's SAVE plan and how, those suits might impact the student loan system as well. If you could give us a rundown of that as well.
Yeah, sure. So, so there are two separate lawsuits brought by two different groups of Republican attorney generals, who each sort of rushed to the courts and rushed to different courts to challenge the SAVE plan. The SAVE plan being, the sort of signature new income-driven repayment plan that dramatically lowers monthly payments for most borrowers, shortens the timeline, the number of payments you have to make before being debt free for some borrowers, and protects against balances going up by not charging you more interest than you can actually pay each month. Some really simple common sense fixes to the program. And I think everyone was really surprised to see these lawsuits come, in part because the lawsuits were filed like almost a year after the plan was put into place, and the Republican AGs said, "We need emergency relief from the courts. We need you to act now on this emergency that we sort of created by sitting on our hands for a year while people enrolled and started benefiting from these plans." But it was also surprising. Because the legal authority for income-driven repayment plans is about 30 years old. We've had Congress told the Department of Education to create plans where borrowers would make payments based on their income and wouldn't require people to pay for more than 25 years back in the 90s. And presidents of or administrations of both Democrats and Republicans since that time have either created or maintained these various income-driven repayment plans that all work in the same way. They all say you make a payment based on a percentage of your income over a protected amount, and after X number of years, we'll cancel any remaining balance. That was like very clear cut. That was agreed across the board. Everyone from Project 2025 to your most vigorous debt cancellation advocates all agreed that this is what the law said, and that was straightforward. So it was a pretty big shock that that all of these Republican AGs came out swinging against this plan and arguing that it was unlawful and that Congress hadn't actually authorized it, notwithstanding what we had seen and witnessed for 30 years. I want to say the lawsuits are ongoing. There are no final decisions yet. However, that doesn't mean they haven't been incredibly disruptive. And we are at a place now where those lawsuits are going to be ongoing across the change in administration. And although the Biden administration has been, as you would probably expect, vigorously defending their own plan, the SAVE plan, I think there's a real question whether the Trump administration is going to vigorously defend the SAVE plan from these challenges, or whether they'll sort of give it away. So where are we now? Since August, there has been a court order in place that temporarily blocks the government from offering borrowers many of the benefits of the SAVE plan, including blocking them from offering the lower monthly payments, the protection against balance growth by charging more interest than people are paying, and preventing the government from ultimately canceling debts under the plan. And that's been interpreted to apply not just to canceling debts under the SAVE plan, but also to prevent the government from canceling debts under the pay-as-you-earn plan, or PAYE, as well as the original income contingent repayment plan, or ICR. So not just impacting borrowers in the SAVE plan, but impacting borrowers in a number of plans. That court order is temporary. It's a sort of until we decide the next stage of the case. The government can't act on these things, but even though it's just temporary, it's been incredibly disruptive. Among other things, it has meant that the department can't continue offering borrowers the benefits of the SAVE plan right now. So for the roughly 8 million people who are already enrolled in SAVE before this court order was put into effect, the department has responded by just putting all of those people into a special forbearance status, where they aren't billed, they're not making payments, they're luckily not being charged interest, but they're also not making progress towards being debt free. So those borrowers are in a limbo. They don't know, that they've been told they will be in that status at least until April, I believe it is now. But they're sort of stuck. They're not making progress. Unlike the payment pause, that we had before, they're not getting credit for this time towards PSLF or having their debt canceled under IDR. So it's sort of a tough place to be, although it could be worse. Like, they're at least not being charged interest. But it has also meant that the department has had to change its IDR application processes, which has also been very disruptive for people who aren't in the SAVE plan. So for everyone else, it's been disruptive as well. So because there's only a single application process that's used for all of the IDR plans, it's not a separate application for SAVE. You apply for SAVE by checking a box on a broader application. They had to pull down that entire application for all of the IDR plans. And make changes to it so that they weren't sort of promising borrowers things that the courts had blocked them from promising. They finished doing that. The application is back up online. You can apply for any of the IDR plans, including the SAVE plan right now, but servers generally still aren't processing those applications. So you can submit your application, but you can't actually get into an IDR plan right now. It has proven like frustratingly difficult to just like get this process going again and get the servicers processing the applications. Even once they do start processing the applications again, there's going to be a backlog. There's going to be, hundreds and thousands of borrowers who've applied for these plans whose applications haven't been processed yet that they're going to have to go through. So it's going to take a while. So that all of that is to say that it's disruptive not just for the 8 million people in SAVE, but it's disruptive for everyone else who wants to lower their payment by getting into an IDR plan, or who wants to make progress on PSLF or towards having their loans forgiven. It's really quite a mess, and it's created not just a lot of like very reasonable confusion and frustration, but also I'm concerned that there's a real risk that borrowers who can't get into a more affordable payment plan right now, who've come out of the on-ramp and they've decided they can't afford their current payments, they need an IDR plan, they've tried to apply and been told the application's down, or they have finally applied but nothing has happened, that those folks might just fall into delinquency and default, or just sort of give up on the system, which understandable. They're supposed to be placed, once you apply, you're supposed to be placed in a processing forbearance. We're seeing that is not consistently happening. So it's a real mess. And we're about to have a change in administration, and it could get messier.
Well, well, I think the important takeaway from that is like, while there are significant legal challenges, we have made some significant, we have gained some significant ground, but that we do need to consistently, continue advocating for this broad-based and comprehensive student debt forgiveness plans, and continue voicing our challenges as borrowers. And with that note, I'd love to pass it over to Sabrina to talk a little bit about, because we've talked a lot about the legal challenges, kind of like a lot of policy we've talked about. But I'd love to hear, Sabrina, from you. SDCC hears from borrowers every day on the challenges they're experiencing. What have you heard from folks? How is this impacting them? And what can you share? Like, can you share some stories of how borrowers are being impacted by all this?
Yeah. It's safe to say that this is all very confusing and overwhelming. So I think there's a lot of mental and emotional strain on folks, a lot of concern about people's finances. They don't know what's going to happen with the SAVE plan. They don't know how much to budget for that once they get back into repayment. There's a lot that folks have to consider. Folks are already struggling with their student loan payments. Now they have other things to worry about. It is a mental health issue. It really is. And I know that later we're going to hear from Brian, who's really great, and I'm excited for everyone to hear from him. But this really does have an impact on people. And so we have been hearing from folks a lot of confusion. So they'll call their servicer asking them about the processing forbearance that they were never placed in. As Abby said, their servicer will provide incorrect information. They'll try and escalate that to someone at the ombudsman's office and try and get their case resolved. The case is not resolved, but the case is closed. And so it's this back and forth. The servicer points to one office, the office points back to the servicer, and it feels like this never-ending loop in which folks find themselves in. I had someone reach out about that this morning. And I flagged it for someone at Ed, and they were like, this isn't correct information provided by the servicer, so we're going to have to look into this. So that is happening a lot. And as Abby said, there's also this limbo that folks find themselves in. I'm personally in this limbo right now where I'm in SAVE, but I'm trying to work towards PSLF. And so I'm not getting credits for this time. If I want to get into another IDR plan, the only alternative for me is IBR, income-based repayment. I don't qualify for IBR. The only other option for me is the standard plan. And if I'm in the standard plan, which is a 10-year repayment period, that's the same thing as a PSLF period of 10 years. So it doesn't really make sense for me. My payments would go up. And a lot of folks are finding themselves in this situation. So it's a lot of just there's not that much guidance that we can provide to folks. We can just tell them this is what's available right now, but the loan simulator, try and go through that, see what's available to you, but I can't tell you whether or not you should stay in SAVE or not. That is a personal decision to each person. If you stay in there, you're not going to accumulate PSLF and IDR credits, but you're not going to get interest tacked on during that time. So it really is pros and cons. Do you want to save money and remain in the forbearance, or do you want to continue working towards getting those credits? So it really is overwhelming. It's 8 million people being impacted by this decision. That is a lot to consider. We don't know what's going to happen with the SAFE plan with the new incoming administration. But as we all have said, we have worked under different presidential administrations. We do our best to work with each administration as best as we can. And so we're going to continue doing the work because we're advocates and that's what we do. And so we're going to continue pushing and making sure that borrower stories are front and center, because when we continue to share our stories and our experiences, we're aware of what everyone is going through. Without folks telling us that they're not getting into this processing forbearance, we can't escalate that to the Department of Education to then go in and see what's going on. Without folks telling us their concerns or the lack of communication that they're receiving from their servicers, we don't know where to improve. And so it's really important for us to continue doing this work. Persis mentioned earlier about the public commenting period for like the financial hardship rule. We're working on getting that out to folks so that folks can share their comments and their support for that plan. Again, we don't know what the future holds, but it's important for folks to voice their support for these changes and to show that this is a popular movement. Our movement has, progressed so much over the past few years. And so we don't anticipate that the student debt crisis or the movement to cancel student debt is going away anytime soon. And so again, there is a lot of work to do, but we have to continue making our voices heard and working together in diverse coalitions. I'm not a lawyer, but Persis and Abby are some of the best out there. And so getting their guidance and their steps so that groups like SCCC or Young Invincibles can really get our supporters and our bases mobilized to sign petitions, send letters. All of that is really important. And so this is an effort that will take all of us working together to make sure that we impact the most amount of people.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sabrina. And then thinking about how, this is a continuing fight, I guess I want to transition a little bit and focus a little bit on the borrowers and really talk about what they should know and kind of like what they need to think about. So Abby, I'd love for you to maybe tackle this question. While there's so much confusion right now, it's important borrowers remember what rights they have. What is the best advice you can give to borrowers who may be struggling to keep up with their monthly payments currently, considering everything we've talked about today?
Yeah, so I would say the system is broken and there's almost always something you can do to better manage your own student loans and to avoid going into default, which you really want to avoid going into default. First, there are a lot of different payment plans. So see if there's a payment plan that offers a monthly payment that works for you. Your current plan doesn't work, don't assume there's nothing else out there. There are other plans out there. The loan simulator is imperfect, but it can be a useful tool to help figure out what payment plans there are and what your monthly payment might look like in the different plans. There's also information on studentaid.gov as well as on our own website, studentloanborrowerassistance.org, about the different payment plans and how they calculate your monthly payments. So I always encourage borrowers who are struggling with their monthly payments to first look at those income-driven repayment plans, see if there's a plan that works for them. Now, I'll pause because, as I said before, there's difficulty in actually getting into those IDR plans right now. but you can still apply. You can still go online, submit your request to apply. And if you're not placed, if your application isn't quickly processed and you're not placed in that processing forbearance that I said you're supposed to be placed in, then just as Sabrina said, you can call and ask to be placed in that status. They don't do it, you escalate. It's unfortunate, but like, you got to advocate for yourself here. And then what if you're in the situation where none of the payment plans work for you right now? You've got high expenses you're dealing with. You're caregiving for a family member with high medical needs, other things going on. You need to fix your car. Other priorities come before your student loans right now. In that case, I would say look into postponing your payments by requesting a deferment or a forbearance. Those statuses don't sort of put you any closer to being debt free, but they can at least help prevent you from defaulting. They sort of pause your payments and can give you a little breathing room, and hopefully in the future, your financial situation or the options available to you to repay will look a little different. So they can protect you in the sort of immediate term. And you can request one of those deferments or forbearances from your servicer, and you can get more information about the different deferments and forbearances that are available, again, either on studentaid.gov or on our website, studentloanborrowerassistance.org. And reach out for help.
Amazing. And then talking about the servicers and, advocating for yourself. That in of itself can be challenging when the organization that you're trying to contact doesn't want to hear from you. So Persis, I'd love you to talk about maybe like give some borrowers some advice about like where can they go if they're not getting help from servicers. I've dealt with this personally with my own student loans. I've been on wait times with Mohila upwards of 8 hours. I'd love to hear, offer us some guidance about, hey, who can we go talk to if we are not getting what we need from Mohila or any of our servicers?
Yeah, I mean, this problem is real. As you said, you spent 8 hours. We've heard that story over and over again. We published a report, the Mohila papers, back in the spring, just kind of documenting not just like how so many people have experienced that exact phenomenon, but how like the systems that they've set up, the way they set up their call system really leads people to getting bad advice. And so, gentle plug of all of our websites have information for folks. SVPC runs cancelmystudentdebt.org. That's a place where you can get a lot of information about some of the programs. NCLC and SDCC also have websites with a lot of rich resources on them. But I think, as we alluded to, like this information is necessary to navigate the system, but not sufficient. Right? Because what are you going to do? You can have all the information in the world. And if the servicer is not going to do it, that doesn't help. I with my own loans, have had many back and forths about how the programs are supposed to work. And so the reality is that people will get bad information. The paperwork does get lost. But yes, there are tools and resources. This movement has been driven by people speaking out. And so I think it is critical for folks to complain to the FSA Ombudsman. I think it is critical for folks to complain to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And now more than ever, people need to reach out to their states. States have a very critical role. They are not beholden necessarily to the federal government and who is in the president's office. And so people can complain to their state attorneys general. And we saw during the last Trump administration, a number of states, standing up and supporting borrowers, suing the DeVos administration when the administration was not providing people with their rights. And, in the last several years, we've seen a lot of legislation which has created state student loan ombuds programs. And those are vital resources. They both take the complaints and, lift them up to folks within those states, but they also do in some states have a counseling component that can actually provide assistance to people. Again, we have the list of the states that have those programs on cancelmystudentdebt.org. People can go to it, but I think it is critical for folks when they are experiencing problems to reach out, frankly, to all of those offices. I know that's a lot of work, but it gets the information to as many places as we can so that regulators, law enforcement officials can take action and can do the work of protecting student loan borrowers.
And then thank you for touching on resources, because I wanted to also ask Sabrina, are there any other resources you would plug from SDCC that borrowers can help borrowers get more involved in your organization efforts or other organizations, where they can share stories centered in this policy conversation we're having today at the national and state levels?
Yeah, so I'm going to do a shameless plug of our website, which is studentdebtcrisis.org. You can go to our website, you can sign up to get our emails. We do push out a lot of petitions, letters, send actions that folks can take. You can share your story that way. There's also stories that you can read at our website to see what other folks have been going through. There's also an option to message our team. And so if there is a question that you have, we can try and get back to you as soon as we can. If we need to set up a call with you, we can try and do that. And then if something needs to be escalated, we can work to do that. But essentially, we're going to point you in the right direction. If you're looking for a petition to sign or an action to take, we'll have that available for you. So if you're interested in getting more involved, go to studentdebtcrisis.org, and hopefully we can get you plugged into this movement.
Amazing. Well, now we're going to segue into our Q&A session. And I was monitoring that as we were going along, and we got a lot of great questions. Some technical questions about, plan specifics or, kind of policy specifics, but then some larger, broader questions. And I want to start with a larger, broader question here, because I think it is a question on the top of everyone's mind. And that's the administration change. So we know that's going to be happening. We're going to have a new, we have a president-elect right now who's different from our current administration, who's been very proactive with debt forgiveness plans. One question borrowers are asking is the PSLF program. Is there a world or even a realm of possibility that President-elect Donald Trump can come in and wipe out all of this progress we've made with debt forgiveness under PSLF? I would maybe direct that question to either Abby or Persis, getting the lawyer perspective there.
So I'm happy to take the first cake at this, and Abby, feel free to fill in what I miss. So I mean, I think public service loan forgiveness, folks should understand, is a program that exists in law and statute, right? So like the actual abolition of public service loan forgiveness is something that would take an act of Congress. Congress doesn't do a lot of things. So like that, not out of the realm of possibility, but it is not something that, again, with the stroke of a pen can disappear from law. Now, I think one of the concerns that I do have thinking about the administration of the program is thinking kind of like just like looking back, right? Like looking back to the problems we've had in the past, right? Like, are we going to see active oversight of the private companies that the government is paying to administer this program? One of the things we've seen historically is inaccurate payment counts. It is people, delays in paperwork, wrongful denials. Are we going to see these kind of problems again? I think this is the thing that is top of mind for me. And I think one of the things, in order for folks to protect themselves, especially folks, I have a high degree of confidence that people who've had their loans canceled will continue to have their loans canceled. But I think the thing, people who are in the pipeline, people who have been making progress towards public service loan forgiveness, the things that people can do to protect themselves are keep track of those payments, right? Right now, studentaid.gov and the servicers' websites will give people a borrower account, and people need to keep track of that. I think that will make it harder for those, I think I saw one of the questions was like, will it disappear? Like if you have it, keep track of that, keep track of the payments, keep track of the employment certification forms. But again, I think this is why it is so important for folks when they experience problems to complain about them to the various different enforcement agencies on the state and federal level. Because I think that is really my biggest concern right now, is looking back at how this program was administered during the DeVos era, and how many people had rights under law, but they weren't realizing them because the companies that were paid were not doing their job.
And then additionally, it looked like someone asked a follow-up question to that. Considering that, we're looking at a trifecta in Congress, meaning we have a Republican administration, we have a Republican Senate, and a Republican Congress. Someone additionally asked with regards to budget reconciliation, knowing that they don't necessarily, they can bypass the filibuster theoretically. Could we possibly see an attack on PSLF through like a budget reconciliation move? And if so, what can we do to maybe combat that? I mean, I know that's a big kind of what if, but just voicing the concerns of the people in the Q&A.
I was gonna say that, we haven't seen PSLF as like a top priority for attacking among those in Congress, and additionally that certainly, I don't want to say it's 100% safe. I won't ever give anyone that sort of assurance. However, in the past, when we have seen attacks on PSLF, they've mostly been more forward-looking. So they have tended to suggest that people who've already been participating in the program would be grandfathered into the program, and that the program would be sort of sunsetted out for new borrowers. This is aside from the point about like, what can you do to protect it? But I do want to like give people just the information that's in the back of my head about the extent of this threat. And I think part of the reason that the changes in the past have always been proposed to be for new borrowers is that it's in your contract with the government. Like the PSLF program is written into the master promissory note, which is the contract that borrowers sign with the government. And so it would open up a lot of a big legal question if they attempted to take it away from people who are already participating in the program, and would invite a lot of lawsuits. So that is not one of the things that I think is most likely to, the biggest threat to the student loan program that I see from Congress and the new administration. But it's certainly something like to keep an eye out for.
Amazing. And then switching. Oh, please. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the other things, because one of the other pieces is like what people can do if that does become a threat. And, like public service loan forgiveness was one of the things that was attacked in Project 2025. So we did some mapping with that, and to show the number of people who would be impacted by that. And I think I say that not just because a lot of people would be hurt, which is both true, but also that that's a lot of people to speak out against something, right? And so I think recognizing on the one sense that people, yes, these programs are under attack. And I think one of the reasons is because they are very popular, and they help a lot of people. And I think that is something for people to keep in mind, is that that there is power in that, the number of people who are benefited from that. And so like, if these proposals are to come up, I think it is more important than ever for folks to talk about how important this is to them. And I think that is like really the way that they get defeated.
Amazing. And then our last kind of broader question, and then I want to dive in some of these technical questions regarding the SAVE plan. Or some of the IDR plans. But the last broader question is, do you think we may see something from the Biden administration in these last couple months while they're in office, a broad push using executive action to provide more student debt relief? Do you think we could expect something from that? I know that's also speculative, but maybe people are looking for some hopeful thinking in these last couple months before we have the administration change. If anybody would love to dive into the speculative nature of that one.
Well, what I'll say is that we're all working both behind the scenes and publicly to really put pressure on the administration to do what they can, right? We talked about the IDR account adjustment before. We really need them to keep running that. Whoever is eligible for cancellation needs to get it as soon as possible. Folks who are eligible for PSLF, who have hit the 120 credit mark, need to get that cancellation. So we're doing all that we can to get cancellation, for as many people as possible. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not sure if there's anything else I can add, so I'm just going to leave it.
I appreciate it, offering a glimpse of hope. Amazing. Okay, so then diving into some of these technical questions, which I think some of these are also really important. One person asked how they can vocalize their support for the SAVE program while it's held up in the legal battles, in the court proceedings, how they can vocalize their support or make their voice heard about their support around the SAVE plan.
So I don't know that there's like a good way to influence the court necessarily, but I do think it's important. There are important decisions that need to be made in this next administration. And so I think one of the ways, this is not necessarily the most direct, but again, that there is this notice and comment period that is open for folks to talk about the hardship and the need. And you know, it is a permanent record. I think this is one of the pieces that I think is important for folks to recognize with these notice and comments. Such a wonky, technical, like regulatory process, but what it does is it creates a permanent public record of people's comments and their thoughts and their feelings. And so I think that is one of the ways that people can talk about how this is impacting them. But I do think, again, doing those complaints. I know I'm a broken record in terms of like complain to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, complain to the states, and complain to the Department of Education. But I think those complaints do make a difference. We just saw both the CFPB and the FSA, Student Loan Ombuds, put out reports just this week, you know, encapsulating all of those complaints. And so they do influence policy, and there will be big decisions made kind of in the coming months and years about SAVE and income during repayment. And so folks should use every tool that they have to make their voice known.
I was gonna add that yes, I would anticipate that sometime in the next 4 years, we'll either have a new rulemaking by the Trump administration on income-driven repayment, and or there's a possibility of new legislation by Congress on income-driven repayment. I don't relish saying either of those things, but those things might happen. Those would be, you know, really important times to make your voices heard, and I would expect that that, you know, some of the organizations here and some of our partners would help facilitate borrower comment and borrower contact and letters to your congresspeople about, you know, what you value about SAVE, what's important to you in repayment, and how your student debt impacts you. So like look out, you know, have on your radar that those things might happen, and when they do, it's going to be really important to make your voice heard, but also that you don't have to wait. I would love to see more people doing like writing letters to the editor of their papers, you know, doing other things, talking to people in your community about student debt, about why these lawsuits against the SAVE plans are a problem and how it's impacting your family and people like you. Make it real and be loud. We can't just sort of like sit back and let this progress be wiped away.
Amazing. So I think we are at closing. I think that closes out our Q&A portion. I want to again thank all of the panelists. Y'all have been amazing. Thank you so much. And note any questions you didn't get answered in the chat. I would definitely recommend to reference all of the resources that were shared today during the presentation, and reach out to your state offices as well, your ombudsman's or your service provider. But thank you all so much.